Hello, my name is Sergio Angulo, and I'm a chemistry teacher at your high school. And I'm making this video in response to the request of some of my students who want to know more about how the mRNA vaccines work. So, right at the beginning, let me go ahead and give you guys, in case somebody on the internet, my students know me, but in case somebody on the internet wants to know what my credentials were, why would I know something like this? I am a chemistry teacher in a high school. I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from UCLA. I got that in 1990. So very familiar with all kinds of different chemicals in the bodies and cellular systems. I do have a master's degree in public health in epidemiology, which I also got at UCLA in 1994. And I did attend UCLA Medical School from 1994 to 1995 before I changed my mind because I realized that doctors don't get summer vacations like teachers do. No, I'm kidding. There's much more to it than that, but and it's a nice, long, intriguing story for some people. But just to let you know, I've had some medical training behind me. Once again, master's in public health and epidemiology. After I retire from here, I may be doing some epidemiologic work. We'll see. Anyway, just thought I'd give you some backgrounds as to like why should I believe this guy? Well, um, a lot of the stuff that is happening with the virus and the epidemiology and the numbers and the vaccines, not anything really surprising to me. So I've made this video just to let you know in basically four chapters. Let me go ahead and go into the next slide here to show you how it's constructed because not everybody wants to watch all four chapters. Not everybody needs to watch all four chapters. But if you don't understand some parts of how your cells normally work, well, then you're not going to understand how the vaccine works. If you don't know how your body works, immune system works, then you're not going to understand how the vaccine works. Also, so I had to like make basically two chapters um, just to kind of catch people up so that then we can go ahead and talk about how the vaccine works. So this video is in response to the questions that people asked in school in class, which was how does the mRNA vaccine work? That's the Pfizer Moderna work. Oh, you know what? I think Pfizer was with a Z. Let me go ahead and do that. All right, fine. I'll give them the proper credit. Um, so the first chapter is on the normal process of protein synthesis. In other words, how your body makes proteins, how you get all the information from your genes into the proteins. Because proteins are the guys that go ahead and do all the work for your body. They're structural, right? They'll make up big parts of the cell, and they'll do stuff, or they're also functional. They'll go ahead and they'll make stuff happen. You're supposed to burn sugar. You take sugar and oxygen, you get carbon dioxide, water, and you get ATP, which is energy, out of it. Right? You remember from high school chemistry, and that has a certain process to it. So proteins, we make proteins to do all kinds of stuff, and the proteins are the ones that do the work in the cell. Um, that's the first chapter. If you already know about that, you can skip it, right? And by the way, once I go ahead and get this video edited and put up, this is going to go through YouTube. At the bottom, I will go ahead at what time each paragraph, I mean, each chapter starts, so you can then go ahead and fast forward through that part you don't want to watch, and you can get to the part where that you're interested. I think most people want to see. I think everybody who watches this video probably wants to see the vaccine in action, right? That's chapter 3, mRNA vaccine action. So the question is, do you fully understand the normal process of protein synthesis, which is the first chapter, and the second section, which is the body's normal immune response? In other words, how does your body normally respond to being infected? Okay, and where do we get this immunity from that we get after we've been infected? I mean, you get chickenpox. Hey, my mom took me to go get chickenpox from the neighbor because once I had chickenpox, I'd never get chickenpox in my life again. So how does that? How does the my body's immune system respond to that, and how does that work? Okay, so I will put down, where chapter 1 ends, where chapter 2 ends, if you want to learn about how the body makes proteins, because that's what the vaccine is doing, making proteins so that the body can respond to those. then if you don't want to watch that, I will put down where that chapter ends down below. Okay, um, and the underneath the title of the video. If you don't want to talk about the body's normal, you don't want to hear me talk about the body's normal immune response, I will put down where that ends, and then where section 3 ends, where how the mRNA vaccine works, okay, and how that is going to work with those first two items. Then once we're done with that, some of you guys may only watch that. That's like about 12 and a half minutes. This is a whole hour video, I think this is turning into, but 12 and a half minutes is what people want to know if you know all this other stuff first. The last section is on vaccine misgivings, and that includes stuff like, what are the ingredients in the vaccine? Um, Things like, can it affect my DNA? Things like that. I have a section on that where I address those. I'm sure there's a whole lot of other misgivings out there I haven't thought about, but just a few of them, just so that we can go over those to get an idea of how all this is, to me at this point in time, is pretty normal. I mean, this is something relatively new, and we're not exactly sure all the effects, but um, I've taken it. My wife has taken it. We're going to get my daughter taking it because I've had all this background. Something come up that I didn't think about, or the other scientist? Sure, but I think it's a 1 in a million shot. So anyway, I just wanted to go ahead and explain how the vaccine works and how it takes advantage of all the processes. So let's go ahead and get started with that. Okay, in order to understand how the mRNA vaccines work, we have to first understand how our cells work. And so this is going to go really fast. This is kind of a lesson that can go for a week or two. I'm just going to go real quick. The important thing is to understand that your cells make proteins. Proteins are what does all the work for you, whether it be proteins that are structural, like the proteins that are in your muscles that allow your muscles to contract, or whether they are things like enzymes. And enzymes are these molecules that speed up reactions and allow for things, molecules that are all over the place, kind of catches them and brings them together. Right. So you're we're going to use that function of our cells in order to make virus proteins that are not going to harm us, but are going to cause an immune response. It's going to cause your immune system to work. So let's go over how your cell normally makes proteins. This is something it's doing right now. It's always doing this. Is without, even without the vaccine, your body's doing this. Okay, so here is a cell. At least it's a diagram, a diagram of a cell, and inside the cell is a nucleus. And so they don't really have a nucleus drawn really well, but here's where the information comes in. Your DNA has all kinds of information about you, making all kinds of different proteins. Proteins that color your eye, give you eye color. Proteins that give you the proteins for your hair. Proteins that give you the proteins, as I mentioned, for your muscles. Proteins that help your body burn sugar. That proteins do everything for us. That they are the workers of the cells. So the DNA has that information, and it can regulate how many proteins are made. So all that information is locked in the nucleus through a process called transcription right here. That information is passed on from the molecule DNA to a new molecule. A new molecule is made called RNA. And then once the RNA is made, it has the basically the blueprints for the protein you want. It has it in the RNA. It's same information from DNA to RNA. And then once the RNA is made, it is modified through splicing and export so that it doesn't get gobbled up. And this is important for how the vaccine is going to work and not make too much. But normally, without this splicing here, the RNA gets gobbled up by your cell, but it lives long enough to come out um, into the cytoplasm, which is outside the nucleus. This is kind of a small set. This nucleus is too big, but they had to draw it in, and it comes out to a thing called a ribosome. And on the ribosome, we make chains of what we call amino acids. It's AA here, stand for amino acids. So you make the amino acid chain. Once that amino acid chain is made, then it folds and turns into a protein. Right. So your information goes from the information for the protein and the DNA gets transmitted into a molecule called RNA. It's made and it's got the same information on there. It's like a code. It's like a secret code. Well, no, it's not that secret. And then once that RNA travels into the rest of the cell, into the cell cytoplasm, which is basically the main compartment of the cell, it can then take that information from the RNA through the mRNA. That's where they're mRNA vaccines, and it can go ahead and turn that information into a sequence of amino acids. There's 20 different amino acids. You put them in there, and based on what amino acids are in there, they turn into a protein. Okay, let's take a look at it into a little more detail. But these proteins are made from you all the time, and the vaccine is actually going to make virus proteins using this process. This is a little more less schematic, a little more. This is what DNA looks like. Here's DNA by itself. Famously, it's known as a double helix, right? So it's got a helical shape, but there's two of them. The double helix opens up, and the DNA here in this picture is made out of a white ribbon. When it opens up, uh, these molecules called nucleotides come in and see these little things right here, these little posts. Those represents a nucleotide. That's what nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, are made out of. They're made up of what called nucleotides, and their sequence of nucleotides what gives the code. So when this opens them up, based on the code on the DNA, we put in nucleotides of RNA, which are almost the same but a little different. So the RNA then goes ahead and gets made with using the same sequence of DNA. In other words, it's using the same code. So now we make an mRNA molecule. That mRNA molecule then goes out to the ribosome, this little kind of half protein, half RNA thing that's out inside the cell. And you've got the code on the mRNA. Here you go. So the blue is the mRNA. Then we got these other things called tRNAs. T stands for transfer. M stands for messenger. So mRNA stands for messenger RNA. tRNA stands for transfer RNA. And so each three of these nucleotides on the mRNA are coding for a specific protein. Okay, we call each of these three a codon, and so three of these um, represent a specific, uh, uh, represents a specific amino acid, and then that amino acid is connected to other amino acids, and then that total amino acid sequence turns into a mature protein. Okay, let's take a look a little deeper into this. So once again, here's the schematic again. Here we have DNA made up of, and DNA stands for, by the way, deoxyribonucleic acid, because it uses a sugar called deoxyribose. And deoxyribose is really important because the deoxy is very stable. It's hard to break down. And so your cells will have this for their whole life because it's made up of deoxy, right? Ribose, which is the sugar. So deoxyribonucleic acid. And each of these little, once again, little posts, little kind of tooths in the comb represent a different nucleotide. The RNA is made up of, RNA stands for ribonucleic acid because it uses a sugar named ribose, which is not as stable as deoxyribose. Deoxyribose means it has one less oxygen, and because of that, it's less reactive. That extra oxygen on the RNA is more reactive. And once again, that's going to be important because later on, we don't want too much RNA around. Otherwise, we'll be filling ourselves up with this protein we don't need that much of. So the um, RNA gets made based on the sequence of nucleotides uh, that's on the DNA. Then once you get the RNA, the mRNA, we say specifically, that happens in the nucleus. Then it travels out to the cytoplasm, the main compartment of the cell. And on the cytoplasm, it latches onto a ribosome. And on that ribosome reads three nucleotides at a time to go ahead and code for amino acid at a time. And so every three makes one. So as you can see, there's like a whole string of, it looks like a string of pearls, right? These are string of amino acids. Every circle represents an amino acid. And each one of these amino acids was represented by three nucleotides at a time. This ribose reads from one side to the other. Every three gives you one nucleic acid. Sorry, one amino acid. So it's just kind of moves on down like a zipper uh, down the mRNA to give us the code that tells us what amino acids we should put on our protein. Okay. This word polypeptide is basically an immature protein. Actually, cells will make several proteins at a time in one polypeptide, whole bunch. And then once they're done, it cuts them up with what's called a protease. And now you get all the proteins that come out of that. And that's going to be important in not the vaccine, but another way that a company called Pfizer's got a medicine that's hopefully by the end of this year going to also come in and keep these viral proteins from working. Yeah, so to get into more detail, just hopefully this is a reminder for you guys from biology and in high school or college. DNA is made up of these nucleotides that have certain bases on them called adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Well, I should say that these guys are the names of the actually nucleotides. And so they kind of fit together. Adenine goes with thymine, guanine goes with cytosine. A lot of students, all they remember is A goes with T and G goes with C, and they're able to like pair those together because they have no clue what those meant. But that's what this is right here with the DNA. Um, all right, this last one here. Each one of these right here represents one of those. There's an A and maybe a C and a G. It really depends on what you're coding for, what this DNA is coding for at that point in time. But so these are the nucleic acids or nucleotides, I should say, that code in DNA. Adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Okay. Some of you guys may remember that RNA has almost the same ones, except that RNA also has adenine, guanine, and cytosine. It has a ribose instead of a deoxyribose, and it has a thing called a uracil instead of a thymine. Okay, but they still kind of pair. The in RNA, the adenine instead of pairing with a thymine, it pairs with a uracil. The sequence, there's only four nucleotides, and the sequence of those nucleotides is what gives you the sequence for the um, for the polypeptide. Okay, so whatever those sequence are, AA T A T T T C A T, whatever that sequence is then translated onto an mRNA, is made into an mRNA with those same ones, except instead of a T, there's a U, A U, A C, A G G, A C J G, something like that. And then that code is translated by the ribosomes into uh, these polypeptides made up of individual amino acids. I know it's a lot in this short time, but that's kind of the way it works. Right? There are about 20 amino acids. They all have their own structure, molecular structure, and there are some similarities between all of them, and there's some differences. The shaded parts down here show the differences between one amino acid and the other, and each of these amino acids has different properties. That's why they're in different groups here, based on what they are made out of. So their sequence is important. Now there are 20 different amino acids, right? There's 4 rows of 5. So there's 20 different amino acids that make up all our proteins. Every protein that we have is made up of all uh, these strings of amino acids, and how they are put together gives our proteins their properties. So whether they are going to give us, blue eye color, or they're going to give us black hair color, or curly hair versus straight hair, it all depends on how the sequence of these amino acids, and that's what we're looking for. Um, yeah, so here is the process of what's called um, this process is called transcription. Sorry, I drew a blank there. Transcription. These blue uh, lines represent the DNA uh, nucleotides. Right? Well, the backbone of the DNA. So this is the DNA, and it's made of all these nucleotides: the C, A, C, G. Right? So there's either going to be a T, a G, or a C on all these. Right? And once again, what order they're in is what the code is for the amino acids on that protein, which eventually give that protein its properties. When this DNA opens up, because it's double stranded, right? There's two strands here, right here. When it opens up, then um, another protein called RNA polymerase then can go ahead and copy one of the sequences on here. So it's basically going to have the same sequence here as it does here by using this other this other DNA strand as a template. So whatever the sequence on the DNA here is, we're going to replicate it with on the mRNA by using this template strand. Because if G goes with C, right, and there's a G here, there's got to be a C here. So if we then go ahead and start making our RNA here by putting the complementary nucleotide to C, it's G, right? It matches there. Next one is an A. A went with T, but in RNA, we don't have T's, we have U's instead of T's. So you'd put a U instead of a T, but basically it's G, U, G right here. G, T, G. Same thing, G, T, G, G, U, G. We've just replaced the T with a U. That's the way things work. I don't know why, but that's the way it works. Anyway, so this sequence right here is the same as this sequence, with the exception that the T's have been replaced with U's. Okay, so that's why we're using that as our template strand. Then once that gets made, that mRNA then can go into the ribosomes. And once again, here's your mRNA we just made. And once again, that has G's, U's, C's, A's. Once again, you guys probably remember the G's, C's, U's, A's. That's the main thing that people remember about this part of biology. Every three of them are called a codon, and a different codon, every different codon represents a different um, amino acid. So let's say this tRNA right here has what we call an anticodon, ACG, and ACG represents a cysteine. So here we have an UGC, which goes with the ACG. So this guy is ready to come in, dock in, right? Because the U would go with the A, and the G would go with the C, and the C right here would go with the G. So this guy will dock in, and it'll say, oh, we need a cysteine right here. How do I know it? Because UGC codes for cysteine, and the tRNA is going to come in with the anticodon to UGC. So it's going to bring in your cysteine. That's how we got these guys over here, right? Each three of these is called a codon. So AAA right here is called a codon. AAA codes for a thing called lysine. LYS stands for lysine. And the transfer RNA brings it in. Anyway, so that's how you make the proteins. And that's how our cells make the proteins. And this is how our cells, using the vaccine, are going to make the spike protein from the virus, so that we can go ahead then and make our bodies think that the virus is infected, even though the virus hasn't infected us. But we our own cells made the spike protein, and now our body is going to fight against it, so that when a what do you call it, an actual virus comes in with that same spike protein, our body has seen it already before and knows what to do with it. Okay. Now, one more thing we have to explain before we go on and talk about how this mRNA vaccine works is you have to know how the immune system responds, because all this kind of works together. So we just talked about, the how a cell makes a protein, and now how our immune system responds, because we're going to make a protein that the immune system is going to respond to. Okay, so normally, if you get infected by something, if you get infected by a virus or a bacteria or a worm, you are protected by these things called white blood cells. There are red blood cells. Most blood cells are red blood cells, and their job is to take oxygen to all your body so that that oxygen you breathe in, you can go ahead and burn sugar and proteins and fats and get energy from it. Right. So most blood cells are red blood cells. One type of blood cell, red blood cells. That's like 99% of all the blood cells, and they have one job. On the other hand, all these other blood cells right here, if you see these guys called white blood cells right here, these guys are here to protect you. And there's two different kind of types of blood cells right here. You got these granulocytes, and these are lymphocytes for the most part. Natural killer cells kind of somewhere in between. And the difference, this is the way I like to think of them. These guys right here, the eosinophils, the basophils, the neutrophils. There's also a thing called monocytes. They're like your security guards, right? So when you get infected, they're in the blood right now, and they're all checking stuff out. Hey, everything going well? Is everything okay? And as soon as bacteria tries to get in, they all go out and gobble it up. They go and they do something. They poison it or they gobble it up. Monocytes and macrophages like to go ahead and engulf it. Some of these guys like to shoot stuff at it to kill it. Anyway, so you got your security guards here. Most of the time, all you need is your security guards. But sometimes an infection is able to get in where it gets past the security guards. What do? You call the army. And that's where the lymphocytes come in. The lymphocytes are your army. And here's the interesting thing about the lymphocytes is that you have lymphocytes for basically every specific thing that can infect you. Okay. Measles virus, you got lymphocytes that are already made for those for that virus. Um, Flu virus, you got lymphocytes that are made for that virus. Um, uh, what else? Chickenpox, you got lymphocytes made for that virus. Thing is that they're way deep down in your bones, in the bone marrow. So these guys are fighting. These guys are losing. They're like, oh, we need help. We need help. It takes a little while to go ahead and call up the lymphocytes. But when these guys get going, and basically they know that something has happened because some of these cells, maybe even a natural killer cell or a macrophage, will have encountered this virus that's overwhelming your security guards, and it will go ahead and it gets what's called an antigen. And that antigen could be a protein, it could be a piece of the virus. Like, viruses are made of just more than proteins. They got like a protein covering, they got a fatty um, covering, like a membrane. They got we call glycoproteins. It's have little pieces of sugars. Anyway, so like these macrophages are basically kind of like they're tattletales. They're like, hey, or they're warning. They're guys that are giving the warning. Hey, we need help, and it'll go into the bones. All these guys that have like picked up on this infection will go into the bone marrows, or actually they'll go into bone marrows for the B lymphocytes, or the thymus for the T lymphocytes. That's where the B and the T come from. And they'll say, hey, we need help. We need help. They'll try to find the lymphocyte, or they'll make, if you've never been infected by it, they will make the new lymphocytes that will then attack it. So you have some virus, right? So we'll have some virus right here. And this virus, let's say, has some type of protein on its covering. And it doesn't have to be the protein, it could be just a piece of it. But what happens then is these what we call antigen presenting cells, and there's several of them, macrophages and things like that. They will come by, and so I'm going to put V here for virus, and here is I'm going to call this M for macrophage. This is yours. This is the virus that's infecting you, and they will have a little receptor on there that will recognize this, and then they're going to go, oh, I'm going to go ahead and tell everyone, hey, we've got this thing here, and it goes over here. Here's your macrophage. Now it's got this little piece of protein, or it could have been a piece of, maybe a piece of its um, membrane here, or what have you. And it's going to go ahead and tell the B cells. And in the bone marrow, there's a B cell, that will go, oh, wait, I recognize this. This is my job. So here you have a B, we'll call it a B lymphocyte. So once again, probably in the first week of being infected, your the virus is coming in and overwhelming your security guards. B lymphocytes just finding out after a few days of all this activity going on out there. Also, other macrophages right here is coming in with the little protein that it picked up, and a T cell will go ahead and also pick that up. Okay, so right here, this part right here is, maybe I should make it in red. Right, this is part of the virus. Right, and so this is presenting it to the B and the T lymphocytes. What happens, what's amazing here is that then suddenly from one of each of these cells, we make a bunch of these guys, B's. They start cloning themselves. In other words, they start making a whole army of fighters that are ready to fight this virus. And these B cells are ready to fight this specific virus. The big difference between the other granulocytes that are your security guards is that, hey, the virus infects a cell. Wow, now those guys are just, they've got like weapons that are kind of crude. And they start making a mess of the whole situation. Usually they take care of the job and it's not a big deal. But when it gets overwhelming, now they're making a mess of your throat because the throat cells are all dying left and right. Some of the good cells are being messed up. Some of the bad cells are also being messed up. Same thing with the T cells. Once one of the T cells is activated, it also makes like T cells galore. And T cells, T cell mediated immunity is a little different than B cell mediated immunity. There are two main types of T cells. There are T4 cells and T8 cells. T8 cells are called cytotoxic cells. In other words, these guys go find the virus and destroy it. There's also what we call the natural killer cells, NK cells, and they also will be activated. It's all based on this T cell, the T4 cell. The T4 cells are also called helper T cells. They're the ones that coordinate this. So the T4s are like saying, all right, everybody, we need to go and kill this guy, right? All right, we're going to activate the natural killer cells. We're going to make a bunch of T8 cells. I'm going to make more T4 cells to help me make more T8 cells. The B cells, they don't go on and fight hand to hand. What they do is they make these things called antibodies. Okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and represent an antibody, which is like a protein that goes and attaches. So all these antibodies will go ahead and attach this virus, and it'll make it not be able to infect cells. So these guys are kind of like your bombers, right? From long range distance, they go ahead and put out a whole bunch of these antibodies. So when you hear about antibodies, that's what they're coming from, the B cells. And these guys are all making all these antibodies, which go and attack the virus. They bomb the virus. They don't kill it directly, they inactivate it. The T4 and T8 cells, the T4 cells are coordinating all the ones that are going to go ahead and kill off. Also, the T4 cells also activate the B cells. So if the macrophage doesn't find the B cell, the T4 can help the B cell get started too. These T8 cells will go in, and the T8 will go ahead and attack it directly, kill it. Maybe natural killer cells also. So, not granted, they're not all killing the same virus, but they're killing different viruses. So, from one B cell, from one T4 cells, we get millions upon millions of them. That they're all identical, and they all start attacking the attacker. Okay, so not just this virus, but all the viruses. They're basically probably going to go ahead and attack the cells that have been infected by the viruses, and they'll attack viruses too. So this whole mess is when you start feeling better. Okay, so you have an army that takes a little while to get going, but once it comes in, it just kind of wipes the floor with these guys. Now, that's how your immune system works, basically. It's kind of a crude way of explaining it, but that's basically kind of how you do it. So, real quick reminder here, all these guys, security system, they're working all the time. They're working right now. When you get a bad enough infection, we call in the army, and these guys clone themselves and make a whole bunch of these guys that will go ahead and kill off your virus. Where the where what becomes important is where the after it's done. Once we're all done with this, now some of these B cells, most of these B cells will go ahead and they're done with their life. They did their job. They're done. Thank you very much for your help. Okay. But some of the B cells will stick around. A few of them. Few of the T cells will stick around. These are what we call memory cells. Memory cells. Memory cells here. This one's also memory cells. And this is what we want from a vaccine. Because now, you know, I told you like, it took a little while to get these T and B cells going. Sometimes, if you've never been infected by something, it's a novel virus like the coronavirus was, then your body has to make something that, you know, these guys will go, okay, well, we have these proteins. Well, we don't really recognize everything. So it takes a little longer to go ahead and make these B cells be able to recognize them before it can, attack them. Now these memory cells are going to be they're going to be patrolling in your blood. So instead of having just kind of security guards, nothing against security guards, they do a good job, um, but you know, these security guards, uh, they really don't have the killing power of the army. So these soldiers, active duty soldiers, are going to stick around in your bloodstream. And if you get infected by the same virus again, if you get infected by the same virus again, these guys will recognize and they will proliferate. In other words, they will make copies and they will attack. They will attack so fast you won't even know you're sick. Okay, so that's usually how your immune system works. That's usually because some people have stuff that, you know, happens that doesn't work too well, or you know, in the case of coronavirus, maybe this took too long, or people that are older and their immune system isn't working. You know, just there was just too much damage from the security guards to damage to the lungs, damage to other organs for it to actually kind of kill off the virus before it killed off the host, the individual. But this is what we're banking on: memory cells. Because once you have the memory cells, then the response is much quicker. Okay, so how does this vaccine work? All right, so if you haven't watched the part of the video that talks about how your cells turn DNA information to RNA into protein, you probably need to, or if you already know that, that's fine. I mean, that it's, the important thing is you know how DNA gets turned to RNA, which gets turned into protein. Okay, so normally your body will go ahead and take the information from the DNA and it'll turn it into an RNA molecule. Right, so the DNA will get turned into an RNA molecule. Right, so part of a little segment of this DNA gets turned into RNA, and then that RNA is going to go ahead and get taken to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, RER. On there is ribosomes, and on the ribosomes, you're going to get a protein made, and so these proteins. So let's see. So once again, the same. This is the mRNA, and this messenger RNA is made from the DNA, and that then will go ahead and be taken here to the shouldn't go out into the endoplasmic reticulum, and then on the ribosomes, it will go ahead and make what do we got here? It'll start making proteins. All right, these proteins get made thanks to the endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, and these proteins do whatever they're supposed to do in your cells. So what the vaccine is doing is sending a piece of the viral RNA. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in red because it's from the virus. So we have some mRNA over here, and specifically what the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are doing is they're making the spike protein. So the spike protein. There's a protein on the surface of the virus called the spike protein. All right, and I think I drew it earlier. I didn't call it the spike protein, but that's what it is. That's why I call it a coronavirus, because like looks like it's got a corona or a crown of these spikes. And what happens is your cell has a receptor to it. Okay. And this cell has a name, ACE2 receptor. I won't go into what that means, but your body uses these receptors for something else, to go ahead and regulate things like blood pressure. And so this virus, I'll put the V here for virus, has kind of come up with a receptor that looks like one of your normal molecules, and it kind of hijacks its way into the cell. So it goes ahead and says, "Hey, look, I have this protein that looks like one of the proteins that you want to be pulled in." When it latches on there, that it gets pulled in, and that's how it takes over the cell. So the Pfizer and the Moderna virus basically give the mRNA to code for this protein. Right? So this mRNA is coding for this protein, not the whole virus. It's just coding for the protein. So what happens is your body will then go ahead, your cells, you'll get the injection of this mRNA. Okay, and I'll go over the ingredients list in a little bit. And it puts it into the cell. It takes this mRNA, just like normally your mRNA would go to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. It takes it here, and it goes ahead and it attaches it to a ribosome on the rough endoplasmic reticulum also. It's another structure inside the cell where ribosomes kind of hang out. So this thing was put in by the vaccine. This is the vaccine. It's an RNA like you did, like you made, but it was made in a lab, and it was made to code for this spike protein. Now, um, your body is going to go through the same translation process that it does, right? Remember, turning this mRNA into a protein is translation. So your cells are going to go ahead and take this mRNA and turn it into this spike protein. Right, it's going to look something like this. So it looks kind of like that. So this mRNA that they injected into you goes into your cells and creates, through translation, the process right here is translation, creates these little spikes. It just creates the spikes. It doesn't create the whole virus. Okay. Your body does not have the whole virus. Your body just has a piece of the virus. But then your cell goes, well, what do I need this for? So what it does is it goes ahead and takes these that you just made and it displays them on top here. So now the spikes are sticking out of the cell. Okay, and that's what normally happens. Even if the virus comes in and starts getting gets in and starts duplicating itself, a lot of these spikes will come out. Will come out, and it'll and that's how the rest of your body knows that you've been infected, right? Because you got these spikes that your body's not used to seeing. So, oops, I forgot to put the little head on this one here. So now this spike protein that your body just made is being put out here. Here's the good news. You don't have the full virus that's taken over the cell. You're just using the cell, a healthy cell, to go ahead and make those spike proteins. Just the spike proteins without, this is an mRNA virus, which basically means it does not have DNA. It has mRNA. Okay, and that's how it replicates and works. So now you've got this spike that's on this thing. Even if these guys aren't here, these guys in this on this cell aren't here because this virus did infect you. It was just the mRNA that went in, made the spikes, and maybe you make a whole bunch of spikes. So now your monocytes, which I talked about also on that part of the video, talks about the oops, that talks about the how the uh, immune system works. Now the monocyte will come in and go, oh, hey, there's a virus in here. I can tell because there's spike proteins. I'm going to go ahead and tell. I'm going to tell the T cells, and I'm going to tell the B cells. And if the T cells find out, they'll tell the B cells, and then they'll form a response, like we talked about earlier. Well, they will multiply. Each one will divide, and then those each will divide, and then those all will divide, and they'll make millions of T cells and millions of B cells. And next thing you know, you get an immune response, which is why you feel sick sometimes for a day or two after you've got the vaccine, because your body, your cell made up a little spike protein, and your body responded to that spike protein. Now you've got a whole bunch of T cells and B cells that are fighting it, even though it's not a full virus, it's just a spike protein. Okay, so in a sense, it's kind of ingenious. And remember, the important thing here is that once these are all done with their job, like, okay, no more virus. And it wouldn't be as bad as normal, because they're not going to find a whole bunch of virus. They're like going to get there and go, oh, okay, no more virus. But now you'll have your memory cells. So some of these, sorry, I need to do this. So these guys will all um, die off, but there's a T memory and a B memory that are left around. All these guys die off because they did their job. Okay, and these guys are now circulating. So these guys go up. Even the natural killer cells are around. So what you did is you went ahead and you injected this mRNA that had the code for this spike protein. Not the whole virus, just the spike protein. Your cell did what it normally does, which was turn this piece of mRNA with a certain code into it, into the protein that it codes for, right? Over here, maybe it was, something that gives you a certain eye color, or something that, makes, your the proteins in your, I don't know, your toenails, or whatever. The proteins do all kinds of stuff. So I can make up all kinds of things that these proteins could do. But this one was specifically a spike protein, and then your body doesn't know what to do with it. It goes ahead and displays it on its surface. Now your immune system goes, hey, wait, this is not our proteins. We don't have these proteins, and it creates this immune response. This is why you have the side effects for a day or two after getting the uh, the vaccine. What you want, though, that's not what you really worry about. I mean, that's not what you're going for. What you're going for is this memory. Because if a new virus comes in, you got these T cells and B cells. And so you got a couple of, oops, sorry, didn't click here. And you got another virus comes in, maybe two, and these guys are alive. Well, as alive as a virus can be. That's a whole nother topic. Are viruses really alive? They need to get into your cells to reproduce. They can't do it on their own. Um, it's a whole other ball of wax. So once these guys come in, now the T cells then can go ahead, quickly divide and attack. And so these guys are knocked out before you even feel a thing. Okay, and that's what the vaccine is doing. So we're just taking advantage of what your cells do, your body does, in order to make virus. Your cells are making virus protein. It's not even making the whole virus, just virus protein. In order to go ahead and make these, in order to go ahead and create an immune response that once it's done, these memory cells. So if you're infected, you're actually infected with a virus someday. Now your memory T cells and B cells, you don't have to wait a week for these things to get going. Remember, it takes almost a week for these things to get going, right? In the meantime, your granulocytes, which are your security guards, are trying to hold them back, right? But no, you've got guys with, like, tanks ready to go. This guy's got his rocket launcher ready to go. This guy's got his automatic weapon ready to go. And so when the virus comes in, you just knock it out. Okay. It's not 100%. Sometimes they get through. They cause an infection, but this is a much better response than your security guards. Okay. I will talk a little bit about some of the you know so, some of the myths and some of the worries that people might have in the next segment. So if all you want to know is how the vaccine works, this is basically it. Getting these T cells and B cells is the main thing. Some people worry, though, about Stuff like, oh well, will the RNA affect my DNA? Will I start growing another head out of my neck? I'll address that in the next segment. Okay, in this segment of the video, I plan on talking about people's misgivings and some things that may come up having to do with the virus. Okay, I don't want to say that bad things can never happen, that this thing is like foolproof, because there's those things don't exist. I mean, think about it. People die from eating peanut butter. Some people are allergic to stuff that other people are fine with, right? So even with just things that we think are natural, people can have horrible reactions, even die from. So, a couple of things that I want to talk about. First off, I want to talk about the ingredients of the COVID-19 vaccines, because I've heard a lot of stuff about, oh, don't take the vaccines. Oh, they're made in, they're made with these, these embryos they got from, um, people that the fetuses that were aborted and stuff like that. Okay, which is really not true. So the first thing I wanted to address was what ingredients are in the COVID-19 vaccines. And so I have this web page right here that I found that has the full list, basically the full list of ingredients for all these guys, and you can get into more detail. But as I've mentioned to you guys, I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry and a master's degree in epidemiology. So even though I, I don't, these names aren't in the back of my head, by looking at these names, I kind of know what they are, and I look them up and I can double check them. Okay, so let's take a look at the Pfizer vaccine first. Okay, it's got the mRNA, and we've already talked about that. That's basically what you need in there. That's the main component of the vaccine. So that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. Okay. The next thing, and these are scary looking names for people who have not taken biochemistry. There are lipids. Lipids, they're 4-hydroxybutyl uh, azenidyl dialbishexane 6,1 dialbis 2 uh, hexyl decanoate. Um, that's just a fat molecule. Okay. It's just that these molecules are huge. I don't know if you've ever known this, because if you didn't take organic chemistry, maybe you didn't know this, but fat molecules are huge. I mean, compared to other molecules, right? I'm not talking about like huge as in like they're bigger than a car, but compared to other molecules, they're huge. And a lot of times we name these based on the structure. So all these numbers and these names and this hydroxy and this butyl and this aza and the bis, believe me, that was for me like 2 or 3 years of my life of learning what all these means. Hexane means a 6 carbon compound. All this is just pretty normal. And this basically to me looks like a piece of fat, a fat molecule. 1,2 disteryl and SN glycerol 3 phosphocholine. Yeah, phosphocholine. You guys have those in your membranes already, right? And then cholesterol, of course. I think people have heard about cholesterol, which is technically not a fat, but behaves like a fat in our membranes. So anyway, these three molecules, we need these little fat molecules because they kind of shepherd the mRNA into the cells, right? You shoot it in there, you shoot it into your muscle, right? But you might get it inside a cell, you might get it outside the cell. These need to help the mRNA transfer into the cell. Otherwise, the cell's sitting there going, "All right, I'm not gonna let you in. You're mRNA from somebody else. I'm not gonna let you in." So these things help the mRNA sneak into the cell. Okay. If you've ever had perfume and you have the perfume stay on you for a while, we use stuff like this to get it into your skin cells so that the perfume doesn't just stay on the top and then evaporate in like, you know, 3 seconds. Okay. It's got to kind of permeate in. If you've ever seen people put on a patch, like a tobacco patch or some type of other patch, that's what they use to get that stuff inside your cell. So these guys, these lipids, that's what they're for, to help the mRNA cross the membrane barrier, because the membrane is the covering on the cell that keeps stuff from getting in there that the cell doesn't want. The cell's probably not going to want some random mRNA. So those are the lipids right there. Actually, let me go ahead and go to this one right here. So that's where the fats come in, right? Lipids, and those are the same type of things over here. Then there are salts: potassium chloride, monobasic potassium phosphate, sodium chloride, dibasic sodium phosphate dihydrate. Okay. These are very important to have in there. Okay. If anybody ever shot you with just pure water, you would get sick, right? At least into your bloodstream. You would get sick because you don't just have water in there. All that's what that's going to do is that's going to dilute the stuff that's in there that's doing all kinds of stuff. So potassium chloride, sodium chloride, all those are important to keep this the electrical charges on the cells going. So you can't just shoot stuff in there without providing the same environment that your body has in there. And that's what this is for, and it balances out the pH. You have to have a pH of 7.4. If you go down below 7.35 or above 7.45, you die. So you don't want to be shooting stuff in there without mimicking the environment of the blood that you already have in there. So these things are stuff that you basically have in there. I mean, potassium phosphate, yeah. The dihydrate, sodium phosphate dihydrate, I don't know if you have it in that sense, but you do have phosphates, and you do have potassium and sodium. They're in the chlorides, and these are important. Without these things, your nerves wouldn't conduct, and you just basically flop down. I mean, there's a whole bunch of um, there's a whole bunch of physiology that goes beyond it. So yeah, I can talk for a while on the need for this stuff. So all this very common, right? So the main active ingredient is the mRNA. I guess I don't know if I mentioned that up here. The fats to help get it in there, and the sugar. Why you put sugar in me? As if we don't have enough, as if we don't stuff ourselves with enough sugar, me included. But sucrose is just table sugar. There's actually sugars are a whole class of compounds. There are many sugars: glucose, fructose, galactose, aldose, ribose, all kinds of sugars I can go off. Once again, several years of biochemistry, I've gotten used to these words. So sucrose is a specific sugar. It's made up of glucose and fructose, and that's what we basically. When you go ahead and do a tablespoon of sugar, you're taking sucrose. So this is meant, as I read, to stabilize it. They got to freeze it to keep it from falling apart. So the sucrose interacts with the water and it protects it from the freezing process. And that's it. That's all that's in the Pfizer, right? You got the mRNA, you got your fat molecules, and the fat molecules are important. Otherwise, it's not going to get into the cells. And you got your salts in order to create the cell-like or blood-like environment. Going back over here to the where did it go? Okay, here we go. Moderna virus, very similar, mRNA, right? Once again, it's mRNA. It's also got its lipids. The lipids are a little different, but they're basic same idea. Those are your lipids. Tromethamine and tromethamine hydrochloride are to balance the pH, so you don't have to have so many of these potassium chloride, potassium phosphate. They use this when you're under surgery. So when people undergo surgery, they use this, and they use it in higher amounts. Acetic acid, which is like the basis of vinegar, and sodium acetate trihydrate. Same idea, balancing the pH, and sucrose once again to when they freeze it to be able to keep it from going bad. Um, as it says right here, Pfizer vaccine does not contain eggs, preservatives, or latex. Johnson vaccine, it's similar but a little different. Real quickly, I didn't make anything on this video on the Johnson vaccine, but what it is they take a virus that doesn't really cause much illness in people, and they put a DNA molecule in, so they're actually infecting you with a virus that's not so bad. And that virus, they're called an adenovirus, it's a type of virus, will go ahead and inject DNA and turn it into the RNA that gets turned into the spike protein. Okay, so very similar in that we're making the spike protein like we are for the Pfizer and the Moderna, but the Johnson and Johnson is actually infecting you with a virus that does not cause illness. Okay. All right, so I just want to go over those ingredients list real quick because people were like, "What's in there? Should I take it?" Somebody told me that they're using, dead fetuses from abortions and I shouldn't take it. No, this is all made in the lab, or yeah, basically made in the lab. Number two thing I want to respond to is that people worry about it changing your DNA, and maybe in the future, once again, you growing a new head out of the base of your neck or something like that. Okay, but that doesn't happen because it normally doesn't happen. Let's go back to dealing with the protein synthesis process. Right, it's the process of protein synthesis, and you'll recall as you take DNA and you turn it into mRNA, and then that mRNA gets turned into protein. Right? And so what we're doing here is we are changing the color here. Taking a mRNA, put an mRNA V for virus. And then that mRNA is being turned into, put it into here, mRNA, that's viral. Sorry for that. And then that'll turn it into the spike protein, right? Some people go, well, what if we put the mRNA in there and it goes ahead and changes your DNA? Oops, what happened here? I don't know what's going on with my. Let me go back. There we go. What if it messes up with your DNA? Okay, that doesn't happen. Okay, this is a one-way street. This normally only goes in one direction, from DNA to mRNA. You are born with a certain amount of DNA and a certain sequence of DNA, and you keep that. Okay. Can DNA change through mutation? Yes, it happens, and that's how we get that's how we get variations in our population. That's how we get people with big ears, or eventually with several mutations of the DNA. But this normally doesn't happen. Somebody might go, but doesn't it happen with the HIV virus? Okay. Yes, there are some viruses that do that. Okay. There are some viruses that'll do this. They're called retroviruses. They're a class of viruses. And what they do is this. All right, so you got your DNA in here. So, I'm just going to, oops. Let's do this. All right, you got your DNA here. There's your DNA. And then there is the like an HIV virus. It's a virus right there that has it's actually got this is actually RNA. So let me go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and change the color. So that's it. That's RNA. And so what happens is you're and I studied this for many years before all this happened, because HIV was such a thing in the 90s. So this HIV virus, HIV, remember, stands for human immunodeficiency virus. It's the virus that causes AIDS. Will go ahead and eventually get its RNA into the cell, and then what it'll do is it'll turn it into DNA. All right, so it'll turn it into DNA, and I'm going to color it a different color too, just so that we can. You know what? Let me do this one over here. Let's see a little bit better. So it'll go ahead and it'll turn the RNA into DNA. So this is RNA. All right, this is RNA. It'll turn it into DNA. DNA. This is the DNA from the virus. Then it'll go ahead and incorporate this DNA. It's a tricky little sucker. That was part of the problem. People who are HIV infected are still probably HIV infected because of this, what's going on here. It'll cut over here. It'll cut your DNA here. I gotta get used to doing this. It'll cut here, and it'll create a DNA that is mostly your DNA. But it'll then go ahead and it'll splice a little bit of itself in there. Go ahead and do that, and then And you've got the rest going right here like this, and it splices it in there. So it incorporates itself into your RNA. So this right here, in orange, this right there, that's the HIV DNA. Right? So the HIV virus has RNA. It gets into your cell, and then it, through a process called reverse transcription, let me go ahead and write that down. Reverse transcription turns the RNA into DNA. And then that piece of DNA goes in here so that, hey, you know what? Later on, when this person's not even paying attention, we'll go ahead and turn and make some more uh, RNA virus particles so we can take over the cell. We don't have to take over the cell today. We can take over it later. Okay. Fine and dandy. That is what happened. And that's what happens, and that's what's really kind of messed up about this HIV virus. Okay. Two things that have to happen though. This HIV virus, part of its RNA codes for a thing called number one, reverse transcriptase. Reverse transcriptase is an enzyme that allows the RNA to turn into DNA. We don't have that. Just like we don't have the enzymes that goes allow us to go ahead and digest grass, right? You know, cows, they can go ahead and eat all this grass and they're good, right? But we start eating grass, you know, first off, it doesn't taste well. Secondly, we'll die of starvation, right? Because our body doesn't have the enzyme that digests grass, but cows do. Same thing with the HIV. We don't have reverse transcriptase, so we can't turn the RNA into DNA. So as people are worrying about, oh, is it going to get into my DNA? We're putting RNA in. As of the vaccine is RNA, not DNA. Normally, things don't go from RNA to DNA; they go from DNA to RNA. So that's not an issue. Second thing is that this thing has another enzyme. Once again, enzymes are proteins that do stuff called integrase. Not only do we have to make the DNA, we have to cut up your DNA and take this DNA and put it in, right? So in order to get the DNA, the virus DNA inside of our DNA, we have to go ahead and there has to be an enzyme that allows you to do that. Cuts up your DNA and inserts it. Okay, and that's what integrase does. So HIV will go ahead and turn RNA into DNA, and there's a whole class of of um, of viruses that do that, that have these things called reverse transcriptase integrase. Now, some people, worry like, well, what if the lab went ahead and put in there because Bill, what's his name? Um, the billionaire, the Microsoft guy. His name is escaping me at the moment. Bill Gates. There we go. Maybe he wants to take over the world, and that's why he wants us to do this. Honestly, I can't tell you that's not happening. But I think it's a little far fetched. The ingredients list doesn't have on there. Oh well, you can't believe in ingredients list. If you're at that point, I don't know what to say. But it takes those two enzymes in order to get RNA to be turned into DNA and then integrated into your DNA. It takes specific enzymes to go and do that. And I can't guarantee you that some big pharma company isn't doing that, but uh, I don't know. I guess it depends on how far fetched you can be. I'm just explaining how the virus can work, and in order for this to occur, if the virus is supposed to work, I mean the vaccine is supposed to work a certain way. That's the way it's supposed to work. One last thing on all this is that this is new. I got vaccinated, and I can't guarantee that bad things don't happen. I mean, like I said before, bad things happen sometimes when people eat peanuts or peanut butter or flour. Sometimes it really depends. I mean, everybody's organism is a little different, and I can't 100% guarantee you that you're not going to have a bad experience, and I can't 100% guarantee you that that experience might not end up being so bad that you need to be hospitalized or even not be able to survive. But at this point in time, we've vaccinated 70. Well, not we, but over 70 million people have been vaccinated, and there have been a handful of people that had blood clots and things like that. But if you think about it, it's like 1 in a million. Well, 1 in a million just for the Johnson and Johnson, and even less for others. So it's always a risk. But what's the other alternative? You don't get vaccinated, so now you are possibly going to get something that um, is causing one and a half, between one or two people out of 100 to die. Maybe if you're younger, um, because the odds go down. That's one thing. But let me just go ahead and point this out. So if we had not vaccinated anybody and just kind of eventually let the virus go through and uh, get everybody. So in California, right now we've had about, I think it was like 60,000 people die last I saw, and we're getting near this. California, 40 million people. So we want to get to what's a thing called herd immunity. Herd immunity is where a certain percentage of your population either is immune and not susceptible to getting infected anymore. Okay? When we get to that point, and I'm going to call this 80% because this thing is very infectious. It looks like it's about thousands of times more infectious than the flu, and that's a whole other video probably have to do. But once we get to about 80% of the population that has been either vaccinated or infected, then we get to herd immunity where at that point the virus can't find anybody else to infect. So the other 20% are probably pretty safe. Okay. But 80% of 40 million people is 32 million. That means it would have infected 32 million people if we had no vaccine. They're saying, well, you know what? It's only killing about 1.5%. 1.5% killed. All right, let's take a look at some of these numbers. All right, so 32 million people that get infected. 32 million people. Let's go ahead and say 1.5% die. That is, I'm going to get my number up here. That's 480,000 people. 480,000. And this is just in California. Dead Californians. Okay, so out of 32 million, you might go, well, hey, that's less than half a million, right? 31.5 million people survived, right? Of course, a lot of those people, some of them had long haul, uh, you know, um, symptoms where the COVID vaccine was still, affecting them. 6 months, they can't run like they used to. They're always feeling tired. Their breathing is labored, even though they don't have the virus anymore. But either way, 480,000 dead Californians. Right now, we're at 60,000. Uh, this is what the projection was. This is what we have right now. And right now, we're getting near the end of the pandemic. So maybe another 10,000. Okay. So, um, vaccinate, don't vaccinate. I mean, that was, worst case scenario. It's up to you to decide whether you're going to get vaccinated or not. The important thing is to understand that, you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there's a lot of information that you need to learn in order to feel comfortable with what is happening. I mean, I I'm going to get my daughter vaccinated. I've been vaccinated. My wife's been vaccinated. I'm going to get my daughter vaccinated. And I'm still a little like, what if she's the 1 in a million? Well, it just causes like horrible, damage to her. I mean, it's always kind of a possibility. I could never say it. It's not going to happen, but I've got to kind of balance them out. There is no option for where everything is 100% safe. If you get infected by the virus, it's not 100% safe. If you get a vaccine, it's not 100% safe. But I think that it's much safer to get the vaccine for my daughter and me than to go with the chances of the virus. In both cases, they're pretty small, but you're gonna have to choose one or the other. Okay. So I hope this was helpful. If anybody's got any other questions in class, that would be great. And I don't want to tell anybody one way or the other, but I want to give you guys as much information as about the way it's supposed to work. If something comes up later on, we find out, that, well, the spike protein uh, caused other problems that were long-term damage. We won't know, but I can't think of anything, having had the background in physiology, medicine, biochemistry, and epidemiology that I have. I can't think of anything, and most other experts haven't either. And most of the experts that are actually working in the field haven't either. It doesn't mean that that can't happen, but the chances are low since we can't come up with it. Okay. Anyway, this is just for informational purposes, so I hope that it helped you. It helped you kind of feel better about the decision you make. Okay. Thanks. Thank you for listening.